Hi, I'm Deepika Grover with Grover Mortgage Group.
And I'm Natalie Van Cardo with the Nat Real Estate Team.
Welcome to our new podcast,
Real Estate of Mind,
where we discuss real estate, life, and everything in between.
We're excited for you to follow us and join in on our journey. Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to be chatting all about navigating the rental market as a landlord.
Not as tenants?
No, I think we can do a tenant one like all on its own. But I think it'd be good to let's just focus on landlords today. So I don't know if many people know this, but Ontario has a lot of kind of unique scenarios or situations as being a landlord or a tenant. The first thing is we have the Landlord and Tenant Board, which does a lot of the governing.
Mm-hmm.
And then this episode, we're going to dive into how landlords can avoid some like legal issues, how to find a great tenant, because that's really big right now.
Huge.
There's a lot of fraud going around, and how to maximize your ROI.
Okay, this is a good one. This is going to be a really good one.
Yeah, I think it'll be informative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially because I think a lot of people do have hesitations becoming landlords because it does seem very scary and intimidating.
Yeah.
Speaking as a landlord, it is very intimidating.
Making the first jump is difficult because there's a lot of unknowns. The other thing is a lot of people right now are cash flow negative just because of how everything is.
Interest rates.
So it's not for everybody right now. So ideally, we're like when I'm answering these questions, I'm going to be answering them, especially with the ROI, more so like in a stable market where you are cash flow positive.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. So let's get into it. I'll ask you the questions and then you're just going to answer them, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So our expert over here. Our first question, what are the key laws landlords in Ontario should know before renting out their property? Oh, this is a good one.
Yeah. So the Landlord and Tenant Board is huge because they are the governing body. They are backlogged since COVID. They need a revamp on the Landlord and Tenant Board, but essentially you need to know those rules inside and out because how you're treating your client, it's all going to fall back on that. And it's very tailored to being in favor of the tenant.
Very.
Yeah. So just make sure you know what you're doing and documenting everything properly is huge. We also need to document the lease on a standard Ontario agreement. So this is fairly new. Before we could just do it on our regular realtor forms.
OREA form,
so we still do that. But now we have to add the Ontario lease agreement. So everything that's in our OREA forms has to be transcribed onto the Ontario lease agreement.
Can you explain why that has to be done and also what happens if you don't do that? Like, is the OREA form no longer binding?
So the government implemented this, I guess, to just kind of make it a standardized thing that everybody uses this one form because you had OREA forms, you had own landlords creating their own forms and having people
just
sign
like on a
it.
Word doc, yeah.
So it's kind of like all incapacitating where that's not the right word.
Encompassing?
Encompassing. Thank you. Incapacitating. It sounds like someone's dying. Okay. Encompassing of like all of the rules and all of that. So it's foolproof. There's things that I don't like about the form and how things are written. Like one of them, especially where it says like the deposit, it only wants you to put for like last, but typically
It's
people
first and
give
last,
first
right?
and last.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. Because I look at a lot of those forms because like of all the rental like deals I do. And I don't like that section. It makes me very confused.
No, and then you have to also like add a whole other schedule to it, like with if there's like smoking rules or any other additional terms. So still I attach our Schedule A into it. They got to do it a little bit better, but overall that's what we have to transcribe our actual offer onto. Typically once it's agreed upon, then we kind of do it on that. I do both at the same time. Okay. But yeah.
So for my very first rental, like when we rented at my parents' house in like 2019, we didn't do the standard form and we just had the OREA form.
I think it was 2019. When did the form come in place? I forget, but it's fairly new. Maybe 2019 it was still a thing.
Because our realtor did tell us to do it, but like she never did it. She just told us to like get them to sign it.
Yeah.
But then I just like forgot to do it. And then I was always like, I wonder if this is no longer if like the lease is not like valid anymore, if it's not binding
Yeah.
because I didn't do it.
I want to say it came into place probably 2017, 2018. Don't quote me on that, but it was
no,
before
I think it
COVID.
was 2018.
Yeah, it was definitely before COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, like our office, you need to have that.
Yeah,
in
and I know
place.
you did it for me as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And most
So I
people
don't
do
know.
have it. Like most of the rental agreements I get for my deals, like they have that standard form. I just am like wondering if it's like super important to have it. Like what if you miss it? Then like what? Like
Yeah.
for example, if you miss it and you have to go to like the LTB, like the landlord tenant
I
board, like
think
will
would
they
be
no
in the tenant's
longer?
favor. Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. So very important, people, like
Yeah.
get that signed.
So also for like rent control. So some properties have rent control that you can only go up by 2.5% for this new year, 2025. But a lot of people don't know if it's a newer building.
They're not rent controlled.
They're not rent controlled.
I think it's 2019 and prior, right? Or something like that.
I have 2018.
Okay.
But yeah, it's
Okay.
fairly new. And then most new basement apartments don't have rent control on them. What else do I have here? Oh, a new tenant coming into your property. Well, that's kind of basic. So if you have your one tenant's leaving and then you're bringing in a new tenant, you're not subject to the rent control. The rent control is only in place for your
same
current
tenant.
tenant that is continuing onto year 2.
Another really good thing to point out too, which I didn't know, was that once you're like, say you have your original lease is like 1 year, after that 1 year is over, you like automatically are renewed into a month to month with the same tenant.
Yeah, you go month to month. So I always kind of flag my clients. If the tenant is thinking of staying, I would kind of encourage them to go get another year lease signed.
Okay, good to know.
Because if it's month to month, they can leave at any time. And then you won't kind of know yet. They have to give you the standard like 60 days notice. But I would say if they are planning to stay the whole entire year, get another lease agreement signed. So at least you guys know where you stay and then you're locked in with them for that 1 year. A lot of people don't like to do it with like once they become month to month. They kind of just like doing it month to month. But I strongly tell my landlords, try to go get that 1 year lease agreement signed again.
I think it's also scary on the flip side. Like, what if they just never leave? Like, yeah, they might leave early, but or else, like, what if they never leave? Like, our original tenant or my original tenants at like my parents' house back in 2019, it took us so long to evict them.
Yeah. So the other thing, like we'll get to, is you have to provide them with the proper form. So if you are evicting them because of like not
lack
paying
of rent, yeah.
If they're not paying rent, I believe it's an N3 that you have to get signs that they're not paying rent. You need to like serve them with that
And
right
those
away.
forms, there's so many forms. That's another thing people should
They're all
familiarize
start with
themselves
11,
with.
N3, N3.
Yeah, and
So
there's
many.
so many of them. Like the one that's like it's N1. I'm pretty sure that if they don't pay rent, you have to go serve them with an N1. And then if they haven't paid rent for like a number of time, like a long period, then it's like an N3 or something. There's so many of them.
You have to go by the process. Start right away. Document everything. And yeah, that's the main thing. Is there's a lot of paperwork.
And you have to be on top of it, which is exhausting because obviously everybody is living a busy life and it's hard to stay on top of it, which is why I would also recommend if you're like a first time landlord and you are not going to be able to stay on top of it because you have a busy life, get a property management company.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Property managements are huge because they're going in constantly taking a look at the property. They're collecting all your rent. They're dealing with the tenants' issues one-on-one. So if you are busy, yes, definitely do that.
And also another thing is like they don't have that like emotional attachment to the home or to the tenants or whatever. So they're like going in with an unbiased third party opinion. So they're just able to like not emotionally just like serve them the papers.
So there's two types of landlords that I've kind of encountered. You have the one that is like I'll call them a serial landlord. They're used to doing this. They buy properties with that specific intent. And then you have the flip side where they may have bought a property. They were maybe potentially living in it before, and then they said they want to keep it and they make it into a rental. Those people are more emotionally attached to it.
My parents.
And they have a harder time
letting
dealing.
go.
Yeah. Like, oh, they're decorating it this way. Oh, they didn't take out this or whatever it is. So yeah, you got to kind of, once it becomes a rental for you, you kind of have to detach and put your business hat on.
Yeah. which is hard. Like, and if that's hard for you and you know that and you're self-aware about that, get a property management company. Like, there's no shame in that. And they honestly don't charge that much. I think it's like 8 to 10% off of the monthly. 8 to 15. Okay.
Yeah.
And then it's like off the top, right? And it's just goes off the
per month.
rent.
Whatever the rent is. Nowadays it will be harder because if you are cash flow negative.
Oh yeah, fair enough.
You're kind of in more of a red, but yeah.
Fair enough.
So then we have strong eviction rules, notices that you need those certain forms of which we kind of went over.
Yeah.
Which can be the annoying part.
They're very annoying. But definitely go to the landlord tenant board and like familiarize yourself with the forms. Like go to their website.
Bookmark that website.
Yeah.
It's always going to be up. Yeah.
Okay. What are some common legal mistakes landlords make in Ontario?
Oh, okay. So a lot of the time people don't really know what they can and can't ask for from a tenant. So the first one is a security deposit. So you can ask for a key deposit, which basically is an additional fund that they give you as a check that is held. And then once the keys are given to you on return of the property, then you give them that deposit back. But a lot of landlords want a security deposit because they're scared of what if this is damaged, what I'm left with like a mess or whatever it is. They're not allowed to do that. The other thing is pets. So a lot of landlords will say like no pets, pet free. A landlord or a tenant can agree to having no pets, even if they sign an APS or like agreement that says it. And then they bring a pet later on. The landlord has no recourse. No, because by law, they are allowed to have a pet. Yeah. So if I see that in a Schedule A from a landlord, I cross it off. I'm like, you can't legally.
Like there's no point in even having that.
And if they were to try to go to the landlord and tenant board, they're not going to win that one.
Okay. That's really good to know. What about smoking?
So you can have strong smoking rules.
Okay.
That I always have really good smoking rules in my agreement. Even in the Ontario lease agreement, they do have like a checkbox. Is there smoking rules? No smoking rules. Yeah. So I always check yes, smoking rules, and then you attach it with your Schedule A.
Okay. The pet thing is really good to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. What should landlords look for in a tenant application?
Okay. So you want a employment letter.
First, maybe explain what a tenant application is.
Okay. So when a tenant wants to rent out your property, they will give you a rental application form. On that, they have their information, who's going to be staying in the property. So if they have children or if it's going to be a partner, whatever that is. It also outlines their past work history. So where they're currently working, where they've worked in the past, where they also have lived for the last couple of years. There's a line to see if they have like a car, what type of car they have, and references as well. So that has to be filled out. I take that and then I look at it. And then we also ask for supporting documents. So that would be employment letters, your credit report, and then potentially even recent pay stubs. So from there, I will start doing my digging, which is calling their employer, calling their references, calling their old landlords if they had one, and just getting an overall picture and then presenting it to my client of like, this is what I found. I also encourage my clients, if they are considering this particular tenant, to either do a Zoom meeting or meet them in person because you will get to know who they are essentially. And then you can decide if, yes, this is the type of person that I would like to rent to.
That's a really good thing that you do, because I did a Zoom with all three of the people that were bidding on my condo, and it made a huge difference, like actually getting to know them.
Exactly.
I think a lot of people are like, oh, it should be like, anonymous, like who the landlord is and who the tenant is. Like they shouldn't have too much, like especially going through a realtor, going through a property management company. But I like that. Like I like,
especially if you're not like a serial landlord, I like that personal touch, because if you're going to go in and like review your property or take a look at it, inspect it, you want to have that rapport with
100%.
them. You want them to be able to easily call you if something's like leaking or whatever it may be. You want that rapport.
Yeah.
So that helps it kind of get off the right foot off the bat. We do have to abide by like the human code of conduct, like when we're investigating them. Not investigating, or researching who they are. I'm super paranoid about fraud. because there's so many fraudulent documents. I've sent you credit reports. I'm like, is this an actual thing?
Yeah.
Like, can you take a double look at it? Because there's so many different crediting reports that you can get nowadays. So like, I'm always scared. And then, just making sure that you do get a hold of their employer, that it's a legitimate employer, and kind of checking all your boxes.
This may be a question that comes up later, but what can tenants do that are new to Canada and may not necessarily have a credit report, or maybe aren't starting a job until a couple months later, but they need a place to live now?
So I've dealt with somebody from Australia, and they have like a similar credit history there. So we grabbed their credit from there and reviewed it.
Okay.
I would say a lot of the time giving upfront rent, like upfront
Like
months,
extra months, right?
is helpful. A landlord cannot ask for it. It has to be offered by the tenant.
Okay.
And like even in the agreement, if a tenant is giving them like a full year's rent upfront, I'll have a certain clause in there that says that the tenant is offering the upfront rent.
And it's not like a requirement by the landlord.
They're doing it on their own.
Why can the landlord not ask for it?
It's in the landlord and tenant board.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They can't do it.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then what if the tenant that's new to Canada can't provide a credit report?
An employment letter. So if they are being employed, I kind of feel for people coming new to Canada, because there's a lot of scrutiny that they're going to go through because they have a lack of history.
Yeah.
Even showing like recent bank statements may help. But it's always important, like not even dealing with foreigners, but just in general, that the landlord should be like seeking legal advice of what they need to be doing.
Okay.
At all times. Yeah.
Very important.
I am not a lawyer. Always default to your
fair
lawyer.
enough. Yeah. That makes sense.
But it is definitely a little bit more difficult for like foreigners who are just coming here and getting situated.
Yeah. I know. I always think about that because there are like an influx of new to Canada, right? And I'm like, what are they doing?
But like as an example, your tenants.
Yeah.
So they didn't really have
No, they didn't
credit.
have history, but they offered to pay extra months up front.
Yeah.
And then we did do the employment verification, which helped.
Yes, but one of them, it was hard to find the phone number.
Yes,
That's the other
I
thing.
remember.
So nowadays, like to get a hold of an employer can be really difficult, because you're like, unless it's through HR, it's very hard to kind of track them down. So I actually had to go to LinkedIn. And
I remember,
them.
You went so above and beyond for that. Oh my God, I was so appreciative.
Well, especially because they weren't living here. They didn't really see the property in person.
No,
first.
you like FaceTime them or sent them a video, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was just, there was a lot. I'm like, I need to make sure that like nothing goes wrong. So yeah. But everything was legitimate and good.
And I think like also like judging by the character of the like tenants as well. Like I was comfortable with the ones that I ended up choosing because like they were a young couple. They had like a 4-month-old daughter. I was like, okay, they're not coming here to like mess around.
Mm-hmm.
They're coming here to like make a life for themselves. They seem like good people. So it kind of goes beyond the documents too. Like you kind of have to have like a little bit of a good judge of character, which is definitely hard sometimes because people
And that's where like interviewing them is huge. Because if you didn't have that interview with them,
I would have.
I don't know if you would have picked them looking on paper.
Just looking out. Exactly. Yeah. Okay. How can landlords protect themselves when screening tenants? The interview process.
Yeah,
for sure.
Just thorough background checks. Thorough.
Yeah.
If you're not using a realtor, do it on your own. Again, just reviewing all the documents and then getting a good
Can I just interject as someone who's not a realtor? And I originally started by not using a realtor. And then I ended up using a realtor and it went so much better. Like I'm a huge advocate for just use the professional to do the job. Mm-hmm. I don't know, like, cause it's not like I wasn't having showings. I was having so many showings, but then something would always end up happening where like the offer just wouldn't come through. Like they'd be super interested in the unit. They'd be like, we're going to put an offer in. It just wouldn't come through. And then I'd be following up with them and they'd be like, oh, we're just not interested. But then as soon as you took over, we ended up having like a bidding war with like 3 different offers.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it was, but I'm a huge advocate for let the professionals do.
And it's hard. Like when you post on all those different sites, like you're getting inundated all the time.
Exactly.
And even though like we also use those sites, I don't know. I do it as a professional. So I don't know the difference if I was just to do it on my own.
I don't know. I think it's just like maybe people take it more seriously when there's a professional behind it because they're like, I don't know, like maybe when I was showing, I was like, oh, this is my unit, and maybe people, I don't know. But I just found the results were a lot better when using a realtor. So use a realtor. Save your time. I know it's like 1 month's worth of rent, but I think it's so worth it because you'll get it rented a lot quicker, I think, than if you just try to do it yourself, right?
I think that's true.
Okay, what are some tips for maintaining a positive relationship with the tenant? This is so important.
Just keeping an open forum, creating that communication level, and like tell them like if there's an issue, you can do X, Y, and Z to contact me. Being really prompt in responding to their concerns. So like if there is a flood or the sink is dripping, make sure that you are taking those things seriously. A lot of the time, like when I talk to people that I've rented in the past, they have horror stories from bad landlords. You don't want to be that person because you my thing is always karma. Like you get what you give. And if you really care about your property, you want somebody to take care of it, you should also show that on your end as well.
And like, I think the more welcome you make them feel, the better they'll treat your property, which is the end goal, right? Like you don't want somebody trashing your property. We had that happen to us.
I would love them calling me like, hey, this is leaking, this is happening, because like they're concerned.
My tenants do that. They're so good with like right away telling me like what's going on, and I love it.
And then you know from that they're kind of caring for your property.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say, do regular inspections. Go through. I don't say monthly, but I would say maybe quarterly. Like give them the 24 hours notice. Make sure that anytime that you're visiting the property, you do the proper notice. So you give them like an email. You tell them, hey, I want to come on this date with more than 24 hours notice given, and then just do a quick walkthrough. A lot of the times tenants may forget to like change the furnace filter. So like have these things in your car with you just in case. So that way like, you can quickly do that for them and that they'd appreciate that too.
That's really smart. I didn't even think about that. Yeah. Good. Okay. What should a landlord do to handle unexpected maintenance costs?
Okay. So ideally, if you are cash flow positive on your property, you want to be saving a portion of that to create a fund for anything that may happen with the property. So I always say on the safe side, 10 to 15%. When you're cash flow negative, it's obviously a little bit more difficult to do. But in all purposes, if you are cash flow positive, save that or have your own savings account that can deal with these issues. And then also just know the age of your property and make sure you do proper maintenance on your home. So that way, like you can kind of forecast what's going to happen. And there's always unexpected things that will happen. But just ideally, if you're constantly inspecting the property and before you hand it over to a new tenant that you're doing all these repairs, and you shouldn't have an issue.
And I think honestly, like the maintenance costs will probably be similar to if you were living there anyways, right? Regardless of whether you have it rented or not. I think the advice would probably be similar even if you were owning the house and living there, right? Because
so like
a primary residence has maintenance costs too.
I know a lot of tenants who can afford their own home, but they choose not to because like one I'm thinking of, she's a single lady. She's like, I don't want to do the upkeep. I know that the landlord would do that for me. So it's like certain things for her. She's like, I don't want to be an owner yet.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, it kind of makes sense.
No, fair enough. Honestly, I think there's a study that was done, which was like, does it make more sense to put your money into a house or take that money that you're going to put in for a down payment and just invest it into the stock market?
Yeah.
Like which one's better kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, there's two schools of thoughts, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And like owning a primary residence, definitely like you don't own a primary residence for like to make money or for investment purposes. Like that's what a rental property is for. So
see, I look at it different. I think we've had this debate.
Yeah, we have.
My own home. Yes, it is an investment. It is. You have to think of it as an investment.
Yeah, but it's also like you're putting so much property taxes, heat, interest payments, like maintenance costs, the furnace breaks, the AC, the roof, whatever. It's like, what's the return on investment at the end of the day?
Oh, depending on when you're selling it. Think of the baby boomers.
Yeah, fair enough. No, like I get it, but it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's harder for like a short term. Like if you're only doing it a couple of years, yes, it's harder to forecast. But if you're doing a long-term hold, it should have a very positive return for you.
Yeah, like when my parents bought, they bought in 1999 and they sold in 2020. So they made they quadrupled their money or something. Like it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I think in a stable real estate market, we shouldn't be quadrupling our money. Like I think, you know what I mean? Like,
But that was a long time that they've owned it.
yeah, 20 years.
Yeah. I'm not opposed to it.
You're like, why are we not trying to make money over here?
I know there's so many levels to this conversation.
There
of,
is.
like, what's gonna
Yeah, this
happen
is
with
a
our
different
kids.
conversation. Yeah, this is a different conversation. But,
Yes.
okay, what should landlords do if a tenant stops paying rent? Yeah, we touched on this a little bit.
No.
It's really, really hectic. And I've been through the process with the LTB and the small courts and stuff.
Yeah.
It is hectic and you are not guaranteed your money back. Not
Yeah,
to
so why
scare
don't you
anyone.
talk about it and then I'll kind of chime in because you have like firsthand experience.
Yeah, so we were owed like upwards of like $10,000 from our tenants. I will say my parents' tenants for their home back in 2020, and they just completely stopped paying us rent. It was a horror story. They trashed our house. We couldn't even get into our house. It was just bad. I'm not going to get so into it, but we went through the whole process. We, ended up evicting them. We ended up serving them with all these forms. Then we had to, go to the LTB. We filled out the forms to go to the landlord tenant board that they owe us this much money. We had a meeting in front of the court with several other, because they put you in there's like a lot of people and you're like, whatever. I can't even find the word. Yeah. So you're there and like everyone's like, giving their case story and you give your case story and then they're like, okay, well, we'll try to track them. And then they try to track them.
Yeah.
And if they can't track them, then you're kind of like SOL, right? Like you're kind of out of luck.
Yeah, our government system,
It's not
our court
great.
system's horrible. Okay, so basically, if you go to court and go through all that, even if it's like a civil lawsuit, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but yes. So say it's like I'm suing this person for whatever, and you are awarded the funds, then they kind of just say, okay, well, good luck tracking them down.
Exactly.
and you're like, what? Like,
no way, yeah. Because we had that and they're like, okay, you can go track them down now. And we're like, how are you supposed to do that? And they're like, oh, like go to small courts, go to small claims court, go to like hire a private investigator. I'm like, oh, so we'll just spend more money out of our pocket doing this.
Exactly.
And
So
then
you have
like
to
we
kind of
might
weigh the
not
costs at
even
the
end up getting it. So we just dropped it. Like we just dropped the $10,000 because we're like, it's not worth, our stress in the end of the day. But that's a lot of money.
It is. And it's kind of, this is the frustrating part with the landlord and tenant board that I have, is that it is so tenant focused.
So much.
And there's needs to be something in place for landlords who are being able to offer their property for rent, because we know how hard housing is. So they're able to put this property up for rent. There should be some sort of accountability that the tenant has a responsibility to this landlord to keep the property or return the property in the same state.
Yeah, 100%.
So like, to me, a security deposit is a good option. But yeah, it needs to be reformed a lot.
It really needs to be reformed. I think what is it, 90% towards tenants and 10% towards landlords. Like it's so skewed towards the tenants. It's crazy. And there is an argument where people are like, well, landlords have all this money to purchase these houses and whatever, they're obviously the more privileged ones in society, so tenants should have more rights. And it's like, no, because it's also their hard-earned money. You don't know the circumstances they've gone through to purchase this house, and now they're giving it away for rent. And it's my thing is it's somebody else's property. Don't disrespect it. We were talking about this in another episode as well. Don't disrespect my things kind of thing, right? It doesn't belong to you. You don't own it at the end of the day.
Yeah, essentially it's your house. You're living it. You're paying for it, but you don't own it. It's a car lease. That's the same way that I would
You
look
can't
at
just
it.
trash the car and then at the time when you go give the car back at the end of the
they're
lease,
gonna charge you.
they're going to be like, you trashed our car.
Yeah, you got into
you
seven
have to.
accidents.
Yeah, right. You're going to have to be liable for that. So I think it should be similar with
I agree.
homes, but it's not.
No.
Especially
Not yet.
during
Hopefully it changes.
COVID when there were a lot of landlords just not getting paid. And this was happening in the commercial space as well, right? There was a lot of petitions in Toronto.
Is a lot, it's a lot different because the tenant doesn't have as many rights. Commercial's at a completely different game. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure that they allow, during COVID, it was completely different. I've blocked all of that out.
Suppressing.
But in general, like it's easier to evict a business or like a commercial tenant than residential.
Yeah, it's basically impossible because I remember when we were in the LTB courthouse and, the people in my group, they were telling their stories and we were waiting our turn. This one tenant was like, oh yeah, or the landlord was like, this tenant hasn't paid me in a year. And the tenant was like, well, I can't afford to pay you. And then the judge was like, well, how much can you, I think the rent was like $3,000 or $4,000 a month. Like it was something like astronomically high for that time, like for 2020.
Yeah. So it must have been a big house.
It was a big house, yeah. And like the whole family was living there.
Yeah.
And then the judge was like, okay, well, asking the tenant, like, how much can you afford to pay? And he's like, I can afford to pay $200 a month. And the judge was like, okay, well, you will continue paying $200 a month until like whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how is this fair? Like this person has a mortgage, like the landlord has a mortgage. They have property taxes, they have heating, they have utilities, all this stuff. They're owed $4,000, but the tenant is getting away with paying $200 for whatever reason. Right?
See, I think this is not going to be a popular opinion, but like if you put yourself in that position as a tenant, I think that you should be able to have your wages garnished to pay
Or
for your housing.
evicted.
Yeah.
But we can't evict people here because like everybody has like deserves a right to
yeah.
a home, which I agree with. Obviously, like we're not trying to send people on the streets, but there should be some type of consequences. You shouldn't just be able to not pay $3,800 worth of
they
your
should
rent
be taken out of that home and put into a government housing.
or that. Yeah, exactly.
Like there should be a
something
secondary
that's like
option.
subsidized.
Yeah.
right. Like why is the individual subsidizing your rent? Like it's not their fault. You can't afford it. If you have signed a legal binding agreement that you can afford the rent, and then a year down the road you can't, it's like, well, why is there no repercussions for this?
Yeah. It's angering. But anyways, okay. We don't want my negative viewpoint.
Okay, this one. How can landlords prepare for evictions?
So we talked on that. So I think it's an N4, which is the notice to end tenancy for non-payment.
Yeah.
The other way that you can get a tenant out legally and lawfully is if you have to go in to do renovations, like significant renovations. So the property is like inhabitable. You can evict them and say like, I'm doing renos. Or you're taking that property back for
Yourself to live in, right?
Yeah, like a family member or yourself. Yeah. Yeah, and you have to properly prove that.
But you have to properly prove that, yeah. And I think you have to like live there for like at least a year or something, because then the tenant, because we tried everything under the sun to evict these tenants. So we were like, okay, let's just say like we're moving in there. But then we found out that I think the tenants at any point can go to the house, or they can appoint someone from the LTB to go to the house and like actually investigate if you're living there or not, right?
Yep.
So if you're not actually living there, then you could get fined a huge amount. Or then that tenant has a right to go back into that house and live there again.
Yeah, and then when you're doing those types of things, you have to give them a month's rent so that they can go find something.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, cash for keys. Like I know that's kind of like an unwritten rule. Like say I'm going to give you X amount of money to get out of my house.
You can do that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Why can't you do that?
Oh.
I would say I'm giving you $5,000 to get out.
Wow, I did not know that was an option. Well, I feel like
it's
most
not very
people
ethical. It's not legal. But I would do it.
Yeah.
Lots of people do it. Like especially like in like I had a client who had a property in where was it? I want to say Brantford, downtown Brantford, and they wanted to redevelop it. And the tenants were there for so long. A lot of them were on like government pensions and all that stuff. And she's like, I need to give you guys like cash for keys. So they all took it.
Interesting. I feel like in that case it would be worth it, but in most people's cases, I feel like why are people really evicting their tenants? Because they're not paying rent, or that's basically the main reason. So I feel like if you're already not receiving rent from the tenant, you're not gonna want to offer them more money to leave your house.
It's not
you're
ideal.
already- it's not
but
ideal,
if you want
yeah.
your property back,
I mean,
sometimes you're like,
yeah.
please. Like, and we always see like horror stories on the news and stuff of people. Like I know of a story, it didn't happen to my client, but it was like friends of my client who they bought a property during like the 2019 craze, and it had tenants in it. So they couldn't move into their own property because these tenants from the previous owner would not leave. So they were out of home, they were out of everything, and they closed on this property. I don't know why they closed on it, but they were out, and they had to like fight to get these tenants out of the house they just bought.
That's so stressful.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I think that's why a lot of people don't even want to purchase houses when there's tenants already living in there, right? Because there's no guarantee that the tenants are going to leave.
Yeah, like to be a landlord, it's risky.
It's
Like
so
you're literally
risky.
putting up your collateral and hoping that someone takes
Care of it.
care of it. And
Yeah.
then we have this vacancy tax. I don't know if you got your letter in the mail.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, so it's like you're adding this extra layer of stress on landlords that they have to have somebody in their
living in there,
property, and we
yeah.
don't have proper rules to kind of help mediate for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stressful. Oh my gosh. Okay. What's the best way to address tenants' complaints or conflicts?
Okay. So basically, if you create that foundation of no like trust with them, like you have that, you can come talk to me whenever you need, then it shouldn't be an issue. If they're asking for like outlandish things, then you can kind of just say like, that's not really in my scope of doing it. I don't think it's a necessity. But if like there's a leaky faucet or something that's going to cost them money on their utility bills, and you should
100%.
You should be kind of doing it. The last resort is going to the LTB, the Landlord and Tenant Board. I would say try to make that like the last result, because it's going to be years before you get in front of the court. Yeah. So try whatever way you can to kind of mediate it on your own. And majority of the time, if you have that good relationship, the tenants are going to understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the like horror stories are like one in a million. Like they're not like far and few in between. I think for the most part, like tenants are good. Or at least I would like to believe that.
Yeah.
Right? Because everybody just wants a place to live. I think a lot of tenants are also scared of landlords because they're like, they don't want their landlord like imposing so many things on them, and they don't want their landlord just like showing up randomly to their homes as well. Right? Like you said that.
I have horror stories of like clients that I've had. I didn't help them find these rentals, but like one person in particular, the ceiling caved in. Like there was so much water damage, like all her stuff got damaged, and the landlord wouldn't do anything about it. Like it was like, oh yeah, we'll get to it. Like,
well, yeah. See, it's both ways for sure.
It goes both ways.
Yeah, it goes both ways
because you have like the slum landlord terminology, where I don't think like that's really hard to find one of those. But also, you can kind of tell by going into the property how the landlord's going to be when you're viewing it. Truly,
yeah.
Because a lot of the time, like they haven't even cleaned up from the last person. So like, do you want to rent from this person?
Yeah. Okay. What if a landlord doesn't want to manage their property? Oh.
So we talked
What
about,
does that mean?
Like we talked about hiring a property management company.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. So the property management company is a really good option. I always suggest if you are finding like if you're between tenants, use an agent like we discussed to help you find that new tenant. Yeah, a lot of people can do it on their own though. For the property management, on average, is around 8 to 5% of the monthly rent. So I don't know if you want to give that up. So there's pros and cons to
There's
that.
pros and cons, yeah, especially if you are managing a property that is far from where you live and you just can't drive there all the time. Like for a cottage, for example, like people own cottages, right? And they put them up for Airbnb. I don't think you're going to be wanting to drive 3 to 4 hours away every time to clean the property, to, manage the check-ins, to manage the checkouts, to manage like if there's any, accidents or whatever damage to the property. So I think a property management company in that aspect would be a good idea. But if you're just managing like 1 or 2 and they're like relatively close to where you live and you can make the time for it, then try doing it on your own.
So I have an interesting story. I have a client who purchased in BC, and I did not know this about BC until recently, that the realtors don't rent properties out there. It's very segregated. So if you're a realtor, you just do buying and selling. And if it's for rent, like a rental property, it has to be a property management company.
But then do you have to sign up with them for their services, or can they just
you could just do like the
tenant,
tenant accumulation. But where this particular property was in BC, there was only like 2 or 3 property management companies, and every agent that I spoke to there all referred the same company, and it was not a great company to deal with because they would never get back to my client. I was like mediating in between, like, hey, like, what's the update? All this stuff. And it was like horrible to deal with.
And your client lives here?
My client lives here.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. So anyways, long story short, he's not renting it. He's going to sell it now. But it's like, it was a horror story to get get anybody to talk to him. He's like, I literally have a property ready to go.
Yeah.
Brand new. Can someone just find me a tenant?
That's
and they weren't
interesting.
yeah, I don't know
Why
if
wouldn't they
weren't
want
taking it
his
seriously
business?
or that there was like too much going on. But like the chain of command with that property management company was not ideal. And I'm like, there's an opportunity in that market to be a good property management company.
So that's really good to know as well, because it differs province to province. So we're talking about Ontario laws, but yeah, like BC laws, Alberta laws. I know a lot of people now are starting to buy homes in Alberta because they're a lot cheaper than Ontario. And then, you know, near Banff and Lake Louise, like they're great rental opportunities for Airbnb. So obviously you're not going to be flying back and forth managing those.
Yeah.
So definitely keep in mind and definitely research property management companies and figure out laws in that province.
Yeah.
That's like really good to know.
Figure out laws. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like interview a property management company before you obviously hire them.
Or before you even purchase the property, I think, right? It would be good to know, because once it's purchased, it's purchased. Like you got to either close on it or
Yeah,
sell
if you're buying with the intent to rent it out, then yes, you should be doing all of your research ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really good to know.
Or even picking their brains like before you're purchasing, like where's a good place to rent?
Yeah.
What's the ROI that I can expect in certain areas? Like you need to know these things. And if you're not knowledgeable about the area, tap into realtors and I guess property managers.
And then you were going to jump on or talk about ROI, right?
Yeah. Well, we kind of did just with what to save.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What should, like, how do landlords know that they're getting a good return on their investment? I guess I want to know, like, how do you know if it's worth it or not? Just if you can afford it
So
within your cash flow?
Every investor has their own threshold. A lot of people want to see 5 to 6%. That's so hard now.
Yeah.
It
like
is so hard.
I'm cash flow negative on my property.
Honestly,
I think
anybody
everyone
that
is,
closed
yeah.
recently is
Yeah.
cash flow negative.
Yeah.
So that's the hard kind of part. So I would say during COVID and before, it was possible to get a good property was around 4.5. In certain areas, you could get up to 6. Also, you have to factor in like when you purchased, what your mortgage is, and then what you're including for the land for the tenant. Like if you're including utilities and whatnot, and then if you have a condo, what your condo fees are. So there's things that you can add to your property to increase your ROI. So maybe do a renovation to it to make it look better. Maybe create 2 units if it's a detached or a property that you can do that. That way you can have 2 streams of tenants coming through. So that all helps. With a straight condo, I would say there's lots of benefits because there's less maintenance, but you're kind of capped at what you can potentially do within the space to kind of maximize. So yeah, just kind of figuring out where you want to go as a landlord, what type of property you can afford and what you want to do with it. The easiest thing is to do a renovation and then just get someone that can pay for a higher rent.
And then when you say like they would be looking for like a 4.5 to 6% ROI, like how do you calculate that? Like what does that involve?
So you do your like all your expenses. Mine like what you're making
Expenses
minus
over
all your expenses,
Okay.
and then what you're left
You divide
with.
it? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would do it kind of as the year, not month to month, because everything can vary. But yeah.
Okay. That's good to know. And then another question is what should be included in the clauses of a rental agreement? Right? Like,
Yeah, it's a good one.
that's a good one because I think some realtors include different things than other realtors. You were very thorough with mine and I really liked the things that you included. So go through it. And then go through the differences of clause that you would include in a condo, but not include in a detached home versus like things that you would include in a detached and not on a condo. Right?
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to say if I am representing the landlord, I want to use my own Schedule A because I've made sure that everything is kind of covered. If I'm looking for my tenant, I'm going to be putting a lot less. Which
Obviously,
is fair.
yeah.
So if if that person that's representing the landlord doesn't add to mine, I'm like, great, we don't have many things to kind of be accountable for.
Yeah.
But you want to make sure that certain things are in there. So I'm going to just put my landlord hat on and say what I would include. One, you need to figure out the chattels, what you're leaving in the property, what those are. So list them out. Also put that the landlord is leaving them in good working condition and that it's expected that the tenant leaves them in the same condition, minus regular wear and tear. So like if your fridge is over 10 years old and something goes on it, that's kind of regular wear and tear. But if it's a new fridge and like something breaks in it because something like the tenant smashed it, then that's on the tenant. So a lot of it is kind of common knowledge, like kind of common sense as to like what would be considered as the landlord's scope and what could be the tenant's. But you kind of want to kind of create a baseline. So the shadows. Then what is on the tenant and on the landlord to do in terms of utilities. So if it's a condo, majority of landlords pay the condo fees. But if it's like a freehold, you would have your all your utility bills would be on the tenant. So you have the bills. Then you have, if anything happens in the property, you want to make sure that if there's anything with pipes, anything with the furnace or anything mechanical that happens, that it is on the responsibility of the tenant to notify the landlord in the quickest amount of time. I find if you don't have that, then the tenant may not know that it's on the landlord to kind of come in and do. So they may get scared and say like, oh, I didn't know. I don't want to call the landlord and tell him that like the furnace is making a noise or whatever it is. So kind of outlining the expectations that the landlord has in terms of what the tenant needs to relay to them as an important information. I've seen in really good serial landlords, they may even have a threshold of the amount of money that the tenant would have to pay. So say if anything mechanical happens, $150 or less is on the tenant. Anything above that is on the landlord. So,
wait, and so what is that for? What's like mechanical?
Anything mechanical. So like say furnace. So if the furnace needs to be cleaned, if it is $150 or less, then it's on the tenant to.
Interesting.
Yeah, the tenant to do.
And that's a clause that you add.
It's a clause that you can add. I see it more recently. A lot of tenants will cross it off.
Yeah.
So it's kind of one of those.
I can't imagine they would want that.
Yeah.
For
So
sure.
it's one of those like some people put like if you have a lawn, who's going to maintain the lawn and kind of how.
That's a big one that I actually wanted to touch upon. Like who is responsible for maintaining
Snow removal,
the lawn? Yeah.
salting, anything to do exterior of the property, who's responsible for it.
And it can be either or. They just have to agree on it.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
I had clients who they were really super picky about their properties, so they wanted to be
do
doing
it.
it. So he would come back and do that for them. So again, it's your preference. Smoking rules are huge. Notices. So if you have to give 24 hours of a notice, if you want to do any work in the property, what that kind of looks like, the hours that it can be done, when the property is up to either being sold or if you guys agree that the term's going to end, when a new tenant is going to be coming in, how the showings are going to be handled. There's lots of things that you can think of. Did I miss any?
No, you touched on like everything pretty much.
Yeah. Some of them can be multiple clauses.
Yeah.
Your key deposit, how many keys you're getting. If there's advanced rent, what that looks like.
What looks like and what months it's applied to.
Yeah. I personally like if someone's giving me advanced rent, I like to do it towards the back end of the agreement term. So just so you can get more money up front.
Why do you like doing that? Because you did that for me as well. But what was like the psychology behind it?
Basically that if they stop paying, they're going to do it at the beginning because the back is already covered. They've already given you that. So they have a little bit more of, you have a little bit more leverage. Like you have all this money already. So if anything happens with the tenant, and they can't afford it, it would happen a lot quicker than opposed to at the back. So at least you're kind of cushioned that if anything happens, you already hold those funds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Opposed to them like using them up in the first couple of months and then they kind of not do anything for the
end of it. Yeah. So it like basically saves you. No, that's really smart actually. Because like, as of right now, so as of November was the last time my tenants had to pay me. So they don't have to pay me for the rest of like the next 4 months, but I already have all my 12 months now paid. So like I'm good, right?
Yeah.
No, it was really smart.
Yeah.
Really smart. What else? I think that's it. Did we touch on everything?
I think so. I'm trying to think if we have anything else to add. We should do a tenant one.
We will do a tenant one for sure because there's a lot of things that tenants need to also be aware of. But the main points of this one, I would say, landlords, familiarize yourself with the Landlord Tenant Board website. Go on there. It is such like a plethora of like information there.
I even go and look it up. Oh, the other thing, just as a note, as your realtor, I cannot fill out any of the forms that you're going to send to your tenant
Okay, good to know.
because it becomes null and void. The landlord has to do it.
But then how would they know who's filled it out?
I just say I don't want to. I ain't doing it. Yeah. So that's just like there are little caveats you have to understand. I look at the landlord and tenant board constantly for my clients.
It's good to know.
We'll add the link in our show notes.
Yes, we'll add the link in our show notes.
Follow up with your lawyer all the time.
Yeah, follow up with your
Legal
lawyer. Make sure you have references upon references when you are first screening your tenants. Make sure you're comfortable with them, interview them, get their employment verification, get their bank statements, just everything you can do to prepare yourself. Like, don't go in blind. Make sure you have their ID. That's another mistake I made with my parents' first tenant. We didn't get their ID. The realtor had it, but then I guess they got rid of it because they didn't store it or something. I don't remember.
The broker should have it.
Yeah, I don't know. We asked for it later because we're like, it would have helped us to know what their previous address was, right? And then like,
They didn't fill it out in the rental application?
I don't know.
so many questions.
We were so brand new to the whole process.
Who did you use?
But yeah, so we were so brand new to the whole rental process. So there's a lot of things that I learned from that. And then just going through you now this time, it was just, I was way more well prepared. Like I have all the information. So God forbid I have to go through the court again. At least I have their ID. I have everything. So yeah, just make sure you have everything, credit reports, but honestly, it'll be a good experience.
Yeah, no, for the most part, like we were saying, the average is positive.
Yeah.
There's a few horror stories, but if you do your due diligence ahead of time,
It should be fine.
You should be good.
Yeah.
Fraudulent documents, because you see a lot of supporting documents more than I do. How can people kind of navigate that, or do you have tips?
Here's the thing, fraudulent documents are getting a lot better. Like people are getting a lot better at creating fraudulent documents. Back in the day, like it would be very easy to spot if a letter of employment was fraudulent or if a pay stub was fraudulent. We are told to look for font types. Like if there's a lot of differing font types on a pay stub or on a T4, then that's a red flag. If there's, maybe calculate the pay stubs or make sure the year to date is in line with the month that they're giving the pay stub for. So if on their letter of employment, it says that they make $100,000 a year and now it's October and their year to date is only $60,000, it's like, they're not going to make, So all of that kind of things. But the main thing is calling the employer because you can't go wrong with calling the employer. Also, another big thing, do not call the employer number on the letter of employment, because sometimes what they do is they just link that back to like a friend of theirs who's just going to verify the letter.
So do you know how many times that
go
has happened?
onto the website of the company.
Or it'll be like
Google
the direct
search.
line of somebody. So like I dealt with this it was University of Toronto.
Crazy.
And it wasn't fraudulent at all, but it was just the way that, so I was given a number, the person answering it didn't say they're like University of Toronto, blah, blah, blah. But I guess because they're in the office, they don't have to. It was just really bizarre. So I got freaked out. I called the school and they got led to all these people. And then, I had to verify it that way, which was a lot worse. But it ended up getting back to that one person.
Yeah.
So I suggest the same thing. Kind of
Do
look
a
for
Google
the website.
search.
Yeah. Make sure it's a real company.
And
I find if you do have questions and you ask the tenant for like more supporting documents, if you're hit with resistance, then it's a flag. Like you'll be able to kind of intuitively kind of gauge it as well. Because if they are saying, "Oh, I don't have that," or whatever it may be, if it's trouble to get some more documentation,
then it's like, why? Yeah,
exactly.
I hit that a lot too when I was trying to rent it out on my own. There was a lot of people who reached out to me on Facebook Marketplace who I was like, they just had like really shady stories, and then when I would ask them for documents, they'd be like, "Oh no, we can't provide those," or "I'm not comfortable with providing those," and I was like, "Well, then I'm not comfortable with like leasing you my home. Like, why would I do that?"
I had this same thing. So I had a property up for rent. They're working with a realtor, and the lady that she was working with had an issue that I was asking for a credit report. And I told
that's a
him,
red
I said,
flag.
Like from realtor to realtor, like this is a standard thing that I'm asking for their credit report.
Yeah.
So it was like this
Credit report is like the main document that you would require, right?
basic.
Like everyone needs a
Yeah. So
That's
it was
a red
like
flag.
a whole thing. We actually like parted ways for a bit. And then they came back and they said, okay, like, we'll give it to you. So it was like, I don't know why she wasn't comfortable with it. She also was renting their other place for like over 10 years. So I think she just hadn't been through the process a lot. But I was like, this is a flag. If
It's
you
a flag, yeah.
Especially as like, why are you working with them as an agent if you don't have their credit report?
100%. And like, it's really important also to know how to read the credit report and like what you're looking out for. Like, you don't just need to see the score. Like I've had clients that have like high 800 scores, but like they have like high utilization, or they have like
what
things
what is usually like high utilization?
High utilization means that your lending, like your borrowing over your lending limit is high. So it should be under 30% for like a good credit score. So for example, say your total lending limits on your credit card, your line of credits, everything is $10,000, right? You should be below, accumulatively, you should be below $3,000, so 30% of your lending limit to have a good credit score. So there's a lot of people, especially now, who are maxed out on all of their credit because, you know, people are living paycheck to paycheck currently.
Yeah.
So it's very, very important to look at these things to make sure that, you know, they don't have too many trade lines, because that shows, why are you constantly seeking credit? Right?
Or if they have lots of credit cards.
Or if they have a lot of credit cards, or if they just have like a lot of like Fairstone, a lot of like Money Mart things on their credit card. Inquiries are really important to look for. Who has recently checked their credit? That will also show up on the Equifax report. If they're constantly having their credit checked, why are you having your credit checked so often? And who is checking your credit so often?
Yeah.
Right?
Makes
like
sense.
So just things like that. Another thing about fraudulent documents that I want to touch upon is match their pay stub net pay to their direct deposit bank statements. Ask for 3 months worth of bank statements. We do it when we do mortgages, and match it. Is the net pay on your pay stub equivalent to the money that's being direct deposited into your bank account?
Yeah.
All of these things you can do to kind of minimize your risk.
No, those are good tips.
Yeah.
Especially the credit report, because a lot of people, they just want to know the score. I'm like, no, I actually need all
No,
the
there's
pages.
a lot. Yeah.
All the pages.
And it's a lot. And like, I get it. It's very difficult to read credit scores, credit reports, but get like a realtor to do it. Or, you know, you've sent some to me in the past too. And I just like check it over really quickly.
I'm nervous.
Right?
I'm like, I don't know. Please tell me if this is legit.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things you can do, but huge thing. Like, yeah, like if they're declining sending you any documents, huge red flag. And you absolutely do not have to feel obligated to be like, oh, it's okay, I'll still, you know, give you my home. It's like, no, like absolutely not.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's it. If you guys have any questions, always feel free to reach out. But we will link, you know, the LTB website in our show notes. And yeah, I hope this was helpful.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
See you next time.